Okay, hello, welcome everybody to this other episode of Talking Naturally. I'm here today with Alison Cutts. Would you like to just quickly introduce yourself, Alison? Tell us who you are and kind of what you do.
Hi, Sammy and everybody else. I'm Alison Cutts. I'm a member and a tutor at NHSN, and my interest is natural history illustration. I teach some courses and classes at NHSN and elsewhere. I also teach at the Royal Botanical Garden, Edinburgh, and the Newcastle Arts Centre, and I do botanical and natural history illustration more generally from my own interest and for publication as well. I live in the North Pennines near Allendale, and I've lived here for about 20 years now, and I really like being in the Northeast.
Lovely. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to chatting, and I know you've got some of your illustrations maybe to show us at some point, which I'm excited to see as well. So yeah, I guess to get started, how did you get into kind of natural history? And I guess, how did you get into natural history, and how did you get into natural history illustration specifically as well?
Yeah, that's a good question about the illustration. I can't really remember how I got into natural history as such. I think I've always been interested, and the very first things that I remember is sitting with my grandma when I was tiny, sitting at the kitchen table looking out of the window, and my gran teaching me about the garden birds and what the names were. And I remember we had a battered old observer's book of birds, and I learned all the birds off by heart, and I've really been interested ever since. I think when I was young, it was more about just sort of identifying things and, oh, what's that one called? Birds first, and then insects. I was never very interested in plants. And then I went to university. I studied zoology at Leeds, and that was amazing because I didn't really know what to expect when I got there, and it opened my eyes so much to what else is out there. There were organisms that I'd just never heard of, didn't know these things existed, and here were all these people studying them, and that was what they did all day, and it was just like a different world, and I just wanted to be a part of that forever. I didn't know quite what I was going to do, how I was going to achieve that. Not sure I really did, but it was wonderful to be there, and I really enjoyed doing that degree. The illustration thing, I enjoyed art at school, and I couldn't decide whether I wanted to study art or something to do with biology. But in the end, I decided to go the biology route. And the very first practical session, I went into the lab, and I didn't know what to expect. And there were some whelks to look at. And the tutor sat us down and explained what it was and said, now I want you to draw that. And I started drawing it, and I thought, goodness, this is really interesting. I can do drawing, and I can learn about animals that I didn't know much about in the first place. And then I was just kind of away, and I really loved those practical sessions, sitting down and dissecting things and drawing them. And I think that's how I got started. And I did lots of drawings, and someone mentioned to our head of department, who was, people may have heard of him. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago. Professor Robert McNeill Alexander at Zoology in Leeds, and someone showed him my drawings, and he rather liked them, and arranged a bit of an exhibition. And I managed to persuade him to let me take fine art as my minor subject from the second year. It wasn't especially relevant to scientific illustration, but it certainly gave me something else to work on whilst I was doing my zoology studies. And I think that was really how the two things came together. And of course, when I came to the end of my degree, I wanted to go and do a master's in scientific illustration, but the only one that was available, I couldn't get any funding for, and that was before the days of student loans. So it wasn't really possible for me to carry on doing that. And the opportunity to do a PhD came up, so I just went with that and carried on drawing sort of informally for colleagues and other people whilst I was being a postgrad, and then as a postdoc, and then just sort of on and off afterwards. And then I kind of got out of the habit, and the botanical thing came up quite a few years after. I saw an advert for a day class in botanical illustration at the Tully House in Carlisle, led by an artist called Valerie Oxley, who's still active. She's quite elderly now, but she's now the chairman of the Institute of Analytical Plant Illustrators, which I'm a member of. And I went along to this day in the Tully House, and I remember it very well. It was in the cellar of Tully House, so it was quite dark, and I didn't know much about plants at the time. I've always been a sort of animal person. And I went into this class, and here was Valerie, this lovely lady, who gave us all a lily, one of those really strong smelling lilies, and started explaining the parts of the flower and then how to draw it. And I sat down and drew it, and I loved that. And then in the afternoon she demonstrated watercolour painting, and I hadn't done much watercolour painting. And there were 3 colours, and you mix them together and you can get any colour. And it was like, wow, this is magic. And I was completely hooked, and I've been painting flowers and other plants in watercolour on and off ever since. Mostly just, well, until a few years ago, for my own pleasure, but I got an opportunity to take the diploma in Botanical Illustration in Edinburgh a few years back, and that was where I came into it from a sort of professional angle. It's hard to find work. I did hope at the time that once I had the diploma I would find lots of work as a professional illustrator, but it's hard to find the work, and my sort of path has gone more into teaching and sharing with other people how drawing and painting natural history subjects really gets you close to them. It's a kind of meditative and really engaging process. So I really enjoy encouraging others to do this kind of work now.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that last bit is particularly important. I know there's a lot of kind of research and just in general that shows just how important connection to nature is, and I think through art and things it's an amazing way to connect with nature on that kind of deeper level, which I think is really beneficial. So yeah, amazing work. That was an amazing timeline. Thank you so much. So I think you mentioned like a couple of people, but was there anybody in particular that kind of inspired you over that timeline, either in the early days or more recently?
No.
And then you mentioned your gran, was it, right at the start?
My gran taught me all about the birds, and then I just kind of carried that through with me, and I can still remember a lot of the teachers and tutors at university sort of introducing me to different kinds of animals that I didn't know existed, particularly things that live in in water. I'd never heard of a flatworm, but I sort of remember them being introduced. And I remember sitting, one of the classes that we had to do was about vertebrate evolution, and we were taught it in a fairly dry way, looking at skulls, and everyone on the course hated it, and I wasn't that keen on it either. But the best part of it was the museum sessions, where we've got to sit in the museum with all these skulls around us, drawing the skulls. And through that, I actually managed to learn this evolutionary timeline. I remember that the person who taught us that wasn't the greatest of teachers, but I sort of found my way around that by doing the drawing. And of course, Neil Alexander at Leeds was ultimately my PhD supervisor, and really encouraged me both in science and in drawing. So yeah, I don't have a sort of icon person that I've always looked up to, or sort of felt particularly inspired by. As an artist, there isn't any one illustrator or scientific artist that I feel particularly connected to. In fact, I'm more interested sort of from the art side in figurative work. So I really like the work of David Hockney, and one of my favourite artists is Ellsworth Kelly, who is an abstract painter, but purely coincidentally spent a lot of time drawing plants, and just sort of through some of his drawings, and they're very spontaneous, as you can maybe be able to see here.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very simple.
Yeah.
But even though this wasn't his natural sort of style of work, mm-hmm. It just shows that kind of observation and total engagement. Total engagement with the subject, like you said earlier, Sammy. When you get into drawing something, when you start looking at it in an analytical and observational way, you just lose all time and lose concept of all time and space, and really connect with your subject. Yeah.
Amazing. Great. So I guess so you mentioned that you're based in the Northeast. So I wondered if you could tell me, have you got any favourite places in the Northeast, or maybe special memories in the Northeast? Like, what is it about the Northeast which you like or love?
What is it about the Northeast that I like or love? I love the valley where I live. And I think the most memorable moment, and this comes back every year, and I think it was the first spring, we moved here at the end of March, and the curlews had just started singing, and I knew what the sound was, of course, but I'd never heard it when they were sort of lying in bed with the window open and the curlews burbling over the house. And that's the sort of most evocative nature moment that I can think of associated with the Northeast. And it happens every year, and I'm always just blown away by it. I watch out for them now. I keep a record of when I first hear them and when I first see them. And I spend quite a lot of time outdoors. I like running as well as nature and drawing. And that's the sort of highlight of the early spring. One day in February, I'm going to head out across the moor, and there's going to be huge flocks of curlews everywhere, standing in the fields, singing, swirling around. And that's just sort of encapsulates where I live and what it's like.
Amazing. Yeah, sounds idyllic. Quite a lot of I've done a few of these interviews now, and curlews get mentioned, I think, in every interview I've done. Yeah, amazing birds. So I guess let's come back to your drawings now, because I'm really keen to get these sketchbooks out. And I guess to go along with getting those sketchbooks out, do you have any specialisms? So you've mentioned botanics, but I thought maybe you could just flick through some of your sketchbooks or some particular drawings and maybe just tell us a little bit more about what you specialize in drawing and what exactly you're trying to draw in those images, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I tend to draw mostly botanical, because that's the training that I had with the diploma that I did in Edinburgh. But as that's a few years ago now, and I'm now starting to drift away from botanicals unless it's requested, but it's usually the one thing that people do request is botanical work.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm starting to remember that actually I'm a zoologist, and I was interested in birds and other animals first and foremost, and one of the things that I'm trying to do this year in my annual sketchbook that I'll show you in a moment is to try and draw more animals than plants. And the other thing that within the plant kingdom, I'm interested in the lower plants. So I'm really keen on mosses, and ferns, and I'd like to spend more time exploring those. Sphagnum is absolutely fascinating when you get it under the microscope. And I'm now starting to think more abstractly and looking at things at a sort of cellular level, and how those things, how they look visually. And so just for an example, can I flick my
yeah, please do.
camera onto the USB? One of the drawings that I completed recently, let's see, is that the right way around, Sammy?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
You could just maybe move it more.
It mirrors sometimes.
Yeah, there we go.
And it comes out the wrong way. This is a drawing that I did recently, and this is the moss Polytrichum formosum, and this is what we would call the habit drawing. This is the whole thing as it appears when you see it growing. But then just to pull a single leaf off and have a look at that under the microscope is in itself fascinating, because within each leaf, these are tiny, but if you blow them up big, you can see that there are these fabulous ridges of plant material and that is where the photosynthesis, the photosynthetic elements, the chlorophyll, is in these sort of lamellae, they're called. You can't see that just looking at the moss. In fact, just looking around to see if I've actually got a bit of dried up. I don't think I have a bit of dried up Polytrichum, but it's just a sort of tiny thing. This is drawn at an enlargement, even the habit drawing down here. And then zooming in even further, this is one of the lamellae in cross section, and it no longer looks like a plant, but it's a wonderfully appealing visual image. And I'm sort of in my own work outside of teaching people and producing illustrations that others might want for their publications, I'm now becoming more interested in exploring these features that you find within a plant or an animal. And this is a cross section through the leaf of a Polytrichum, massively enlarged. So yeah, so put me back on for a moment. Other things that I enjoy, drawing outside of the I mentioned mosses, mosses, ferns, lichens. I'm interested in lichens. Only recently started learning about lichens with the British Lichen Society, and lichens are amazing. I've been drawing lichens recently. I'll show you those in a moment. But I've got some. I'm kind of building up to working out how I'm going to draw that, which is near Floridans. Is quite challenging.
Yeah, I wouldn't know where to start.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about it. Where do you start in all that hair?
Yeah, exactly.
And this is another one that I'm sort of adding to. I'm building up a bit of a lichen herbarium. All windfall, nothing taken that shouldn't be. This is one that I found when I was out running just after Storm Arwen, and it's really sad that this wonderful thing, Ramalina fraxinea, it must have just got blown off. I found it lying in the road, so I'm hoping to make a portrait of that, and this is going to be years old, and just to sort of put it into context, that's how big it is. And these grow, they don't grow near my house, they grow as you head out of the valley, further up towards the open moorland where the air is cleaner. It's fairly reasonably clean around here, but these are this is a lichen of a very clean air, and I found this at quite high altitude, just on a little country lane. Yeah. So I'm looking at plants, lichens, lower plants I particularly enjoy. Trying to do more work on insects. I found recently, at the end of the summer, no, early autumn, so I've got a date on everything. This a wasp nest in my bedroom, and the wasps had emerged quite late, and I was able to find a male wasp in good condition. So did the zoologist thing and started pulling the legs off. This is what I really like. I remember doing this when I was a kid. I used to like to get things. I used to say, oh, how many legs has it got? Should I pull them off? Yeah. But this is the standard way of doing. If you look in any field guide, this is sort of the usual way of doing an illustration of anything that's got a lot of legs. You show the legs once, but it's not necessary to draw the legs out every time on every view of it. They just get in the way. And if you're cramming them onto a page for a field guide, you don't want a lot of legs all overlapping each other. So here's a drawing of the wasp. This is much enlarged, but I just put my hand on so that you can see how big this is in a sketchbook, and everybody knows how big a wasp is. So here's a drawing of the wasp, and then the ventral and dorsal surfaces of it, without the legs, and then a key indicator, a sort of key diagnostic to identify the species, is the pattern on the face. So this one, Vespula vulgaris, has that sort of T bit on, and it's easily confused with a similar one that has a different pattern. So in producing an illustration of that, we're sort of focusing in on the key distinguishing features. So here's a wasp as it looks. Here's the body, showing the patterns, and the sort of the face. And to see the face, you really need to look at it with a hand lens. so I'm giving that information in my drawing, and it's really absorbing to produce a drawing like that. Although I must say, this took me a few days to do, and when I finished, that was getting pretty smelly. Just the opposite page here is a drawing that I did of Polypodium vulgare a little while ago, and that's just that's a pen and ink drawing, and that's the sort of thing that would go would be sort of typical for a scientific paper, or a less fancy field guide. But again, front and back surface of the fronds, and an enlargement showing the story, and then big enlargement just showing how the spores are released, because this thing here snaps and release, and the whole thing breaks open, and the spores fall out. And looking at that kind of detail and drawing it really helps to fix the whole thing in your mind. This book that I'm looking at here, this is what I call my Perpetual Journal, and I started it. They're a bit of a thing on social media, and I wanted to start one, but I didn't really know what I wanted to put in it, and I put it off for 2 or 3 years, and I bought this book. I bought this great big book, which was probably a mistake, because whenever I'm talking about buying sketchbooks in class, I always say, don't buy anything big and expensive, because it's going to be hard to carry around, and also when you open it, the first page, you're going to get really intimidated because you're not going to want to spoil it. So I bought this thing, and it cost me about £20, and it sat on the shelf for about 3 years before I decided what on earth I was going to do with it. And finally I hit on the idea, well, I'll keep what called Perpetual Journal. So I divided the whole thing up. I don't know how many pages there are in it, but on each page I've put the dates. I've divided the whole thing up through the whole year. So I've got a page for every few days, and I don't put myself under. I started it in January 2020, so it's just going into its 3rd year. Wow. So this is my first page, and my first page is I'm quite enthusiastic on the first page. Wow. You know, when I first started this was my very first entry in the journal. And what I decided that I would do is, it's too big. The sketchbook is too big to carry around. So I thought this would be a project that I do in the studio, and everything that goes in it is something that I've found or observed within walking or running distance of my home, or something that's in the house. So the very first thing was a drawing of this piece of turquoise, which I've had for many years. Carried it around with me, and I use it as a sort of paperweight, and it's just on my desk all the time. And I couldn't, when I first opened the journal, I thought, what shall I do? I just pick something up and I'll draw it. So I did a drawing of this piece of turquoise. And the next entry in the journal, a pygmy shrew, which the cat caught. That is drawn at life size. So that was a few days later, and then I sort of moved on, worked through for a year, and then I come back a year later, and I've added the Asplenium fern. That was 2021, and I haven't even written the date on this because I've only just finished it. And this is a lichen on one of the walls outside that I've added this year. So over the years,
Yeah.
I think it's probably sort of a 5, maybe more, depending on the size of the items, years plus project.
Yeah.
Because some weeks I'm busy and the pages are empty. But over time, I'll keep adding things, and I have this sort of rule that nothing comes from too far outside, and it sort of reflects the things that I'm finding as I'm going out. So I've got stuff like when the first pussy willow, first Salix capria, comes into flower, and that was the end of January in 2020, and I thought that was early. Other things that sort of reflect what I'm working on. This is obviously isn't native. This is a cyclamen, and this was a study plant for a course that I was teaching, and I was growing some in the house, so I thought that was okay. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because I'm for far too long, but I'll just show you some of my my favourite pages. This is just a bit of variety. A jackdaw skull found in the garden. We've got lots of jackdaws here. Another lichen.
Wow.
Oh yes. I love horsetails. I'm obsessed with horsetails. So some of these I found very locally. These ones just literally outside, but then I found some different species upon the moorlands later in the year, and this gives me an idea of what happens at what time in the year.
Yeah.
I suppose if I was doing it over a very long period, I could actually track any changes in you know, when things come into flower. Cotton grass from the top of Kilt Law. Rushes. So I like things that are not obvious. Yeah. There's real beauty in the most unexpected items, and then of course some things I just couldn't resist. This is naturalized. That's a wide broadleaf sweet pea that just grows down the track from the house. I think this is probably one of my favourite pages. I love Tiffer. And I did this over 2 years, because the first year, no, I'm telling a lie. This is the summer view, which I did when the plants were young, and I've got some old ones that I drew, the old dried up ones, and then I went back and found them when they were young because I wanted to know what was up here. So I went back. That was February. And this one is July, and I went back and found them when they were actually in flower. And this is the opposite side. This is teasel, and I grow these outside in the garden to attract the birds, and then we get lots of birds on. And this is early in the year when they're just coming into flower, and just kind of pulling them apart. This is what the individual flowers would look like.
Amazing. I love that. I love the idea of going back each year and adding a little bit to it. I think that's such a cool idea. I haven't seen that done before. Yeah, like you said, it would be really nice to see changes, and even if it is only, because you said about maybe 5-year project, you might even see changes over that time, like given how fast the climate is changing. Yeah, that's a really cool idea. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
It may be scary what happens. I mean, depending on how quickly the pages get full, it could be a longer project. I mean, it was really just something that I will keep with me and keep adding to, as long as I'm interested, and as long as there's room in the pages. But sort of more sort of simple things I like to make little sketchbooks just out of drawing paper and bits of card. And this is one that I did. It was just 1 month, just random month, and I made this little sketchbook, and I carried it with me and drew things in it as I was, some things inside, some things outside, just adding lots of notes. And this one was when we had the visit from Dippy. So
Yeah.
I came and sat in the museum,
Wow.
on the floor, and just sketched Dippy, and on a long piece of paper like that, just to try to capture an impression of just how big and fabulous that exhibit was. And these things, I can get them out and just look through them, and that is, I think, is a nicer way of keeping a diary. And I've got other things that I've done similar. A little project that I did on invertebrates for an exhibition down in the Durham Dales, and these were my sort of working notes and sketches, and I did some fancier paintings from them. But actually, I prefer to look back on my notes rather than the finished work. And when I've been on holiday, also taking one with me. This is one that I did on a week's stay in Mull, and I just carried that around in my rucksack, and as I found things of interest, I sat down, had a few pens in my rucksack as well, and just sat down and did a quick sketch. And this one, I think the thing about drawing to connect with nature is that it helps you remember things. Yes. The bottom of that, that is a view of, I think it's rum from Mull, and I remember sitting on the rocks on a beach on a red hot summer day, whilst my husband was fishing, and I sat there for about a couple of hours and just really sort of took in that view and made those visual and written notes about that. And when I look at that, I'm back there now, and I got the back of my neck horribly sunburnt on that day as well. I remember that too. So yeah, that's a sort of sample of my my sketching work. I suppose I should just show you. Paintings tend to be quite big, so I'm just pulling something at random. But for a formal painting, a sort of painting of a leaf, that is the level of detail that would be expected for a botanical illustration. Perhaps more interesting to people in NHSN. Spotted this one on the other side of the room. It's sort of a half flower dissection. That is the flower of a wild cabbage plant that I collected at Tynemouth. I did a project all about cabbage based on the colony at Tynemouth, and then the cultivars, the edible cultivars that we eat. And I was working with an organic grower in Bedlington for the other samples. But I spent a lot of time out at Tynemouth drawing the big cabbage plants there. And I brought back, it was quite hard actually to get the flowers home before they just shriveled up into a bit of nothing. But that's the sort of size that you would need to produce an illustration to show the floral parts, even though the flower itself is about that big, as anybody who's grown cabbages and let them go to seed would know.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with us. That was incredible. I loved it. So I guess just to end, because we are running out of time, I think a nice place to end would just be if you've got any advice for kind of maybe people who are wanting to start nature journaling or drawing nature or doing illustrations, any advice that you would give to people just to kind of get started on that journey?
To get started, I would say start with an open mind. Don't set yourself up with huge expectations, and value the process more than the end result, because certainly what I get from doing this kind of work is the engagement with nature is far more important than producing a nice picture at the end. If you like the picture at the end, that's a bonus, but honestly, you just put them away and forget about them, but you don't forget the process. You can start simple. I wouldn't spend a lot of money on equipment. The simpler you work, the less precious you become about it, and I think that's important. Not to be precious, be open and be willing to sort of experiment and learn. And all you really need is something to draw on, so some kind of paper, and a couple of pencils. You can make yourself a little sketchbook to take out into the field, so take it with you. Set your expectations realistically. To do even that's quite small, but that takes a long time to paint something like that. And if you've got an hour to spend observing a plant, then set your expectations reasonably as what you might be able to achieve in that hour. And then you're not disappointed because you haven't produced a masterpiece, but you might have spent that hour connecting and engaging with a plant or an insect or a tree or whatever it is that you're interested in. You've focused on it, you've looked at it really closely, and you will remember. Certainly the things that I spent, the more time I spend on a drawing, the more likely I am to remember the things. So for example, that little painting of a wasp that I showed you earlier, the time that I spent on that really sort of fixed the details of it in my mind. So don't worry about what the output looks like. Think about more what you're getting from it and how you're engaging with nature. And all you need a few pencils, a bit of paper, and just the time and the motivation to sit down with something that you're interested in studying and observing. I think liking the subject and having a connection to it is important. So if you're not interested in birds, then don't sit down and try to draw birds. If you're not interested in plants, don't draw plants. Draw the thing that you are interested in, and you will get a lot back from it.
Yeah, brilliant advice. Thank you so much. That's a perfect place to end. Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that, and I'm sure our viewers did too. So thank you very much, and yeah, we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.